In 6 inches of soil, our world comes alive. A podcast of passion where all souls thrive.
I think 91% of farmers stated that mental health was the biggest hidden concern for them. I think mental health is something that you often take for granted. But I think it's not something that we as farmers are particularly well programmed to cope with.
I think farming has always been challenging. And it's been challenging because we produce essentials for life.
There are very few industries around the world that are so dependent on factors of which you have little to no control. And I think that must be incredibly difficult when that is your livelihood right there.
No one tells you just how hard life is. At some point, we're all going to have our heart broken. At some point, we're all going to get ourselves into debt somehow. You're going to have all these things and we're not going to know how to deal with that, and we fall apart if we haven't ever been, because a lot of us have never been trained for that.
What are the right things to say when trying to be there for your friends?
So I think the right things to say is probably initially just not to say anything, listen. Like that's the really important thing.
Mates unite in a bold common chase, building our future through Earth's living grace.
Well, welcome, soilmates, to episode 12 of 6 Inches of Soil, the podcast. I'm joined once again by superstar producer Claire Mackenzie. Hi, Claire.
Literally is one moment in my week when Richard calls me that, where everything seems possible. How are you, Richard?
Yeah, I'm good. We thought that we would tackle quite a big topic on today's episode. It's the time of year where, certainly in the Northern Hemisphere, it's the winter time, which means the evenings are dark, it's a bit gloomy and rainy. And so we thought we'd tackle the topic of mental health. And so we've got some really special guests on today to talk about that. But Claire, why do you think mental health is important, particularly on a soil podcast?
I think it's obviously a very pertinent conversation every time you speak to anyone trying to produce food, and that can be even down to in your garden, but primarily for farmers, mental health is constantly brought up. And when we're speaking to anyone, we are always asking them how you are, how you're surviving. Is it the weather? Is it your family? Mostly finance and economics. All of these grueling, complicatedly, heavy topics and heavy conversation, and we didn't want to avoid it. So although Rich and I were so pride in ourselves that our podcast is meant to be uplifting and we're kind of bringing sometimes a light touch to something, we also don't want to ignore big subjects. And every time we're asking anyone, whether that's someone working in the coffee industry up to growing flowers, it's a tough industry. And so we've met some amazing people, and we just wanted to bring them. And I particularly had a very reflective moment at the beginning of the year. I went to the Oxford Real Farming Conference, and we had a listening to the land day. And their big thing was people listen, but they rarely actively listen. And a lot of what we're going to discuss or hear from our guests will be how active listening can really help people who are struggling mentally. Yeah,
and I think farming is such a unique industry, which makes it very susceptible to challenges here. I mean, if you think about all of Annie, my wife, says this to me the whole time when I'm kind of stressing about something. She's like, split it into what you can control and what you can't control. And, worry about things you can control. But the trouble with farming is that there's so much of it that you can't control. I mean, the farmers are obviously very reliant on the weather. They're very reliant on whatever disease pressure may or may not come onto their part of the world at that moment, at the various times that they need or don't need things to happen. Most farmers, I'm in a position where my business, like the way I make money, is very separate from my personal life and my livelihood, but farmers don't have that separation. Mostly farmers, their business is their livelihood, is their land, is their soil, and it's all super interconnected. And then you got to think about as well things like government policies, which fully impact how their financial, what their financial pathway looks like. you put this all together and you kind of have this perfect storm and melting pot of pretty extreme, difficult feelings when things aren't necessarily going the way that you want them to be going. And then layer into that, let's say you're starting down the regenerative pathway and you're deciding to, grow several species of whatever it is in your field, and all of your neighbors are going to be silently or not so silently down the pub judging you for letting your weeds grow a bit longer and things like this. So you've kind of got this perfect storm. And, we'll talk about it in the episode, but the rate of suicide in the farming industry globally is significantly higher than other industries. And it's kind of understandable when you put it in those terms. But there is a lot of hope out there. And we're bringing some really special guests with us today. So who did you bring to this episode, Claire?
Well, last year I was on a panel at a really awesome event, which they've just reopened or launched. Stick the date in your diary, which is the ARC. And on the panel, which I chaired, was Hugh Addison, and it was very much about mental health, the whole panel. And Hugh's been touched in many ways by mental health as a family of farmers, generational farmers. And he was doing a challenge at the time, the Borderline Challenge. So I felt it was really, I really was touched by what he said. So we've invited him on. And we've also invited Tom, but you and I kind of invited him together. Farmer Tom from Full Circle Farms, the Garden Army. And he has some incredible insights, not only from his own personal journey, but from those he is working with. So it was really wonderful. And you invited, I think actually Meg, our editor, invited.
Meg put us in touch with Dr. Michael Rosmann, who's for his whole career has been in the agricultural space, but also in the mental health space, listening to farmers, helping them understand that they're not alone. He's got he's done this his whole career, and he'll talk more about that. So thank you for listening. It's a really important topic. We want you, the listener, to feel heard. Please reach out if things that you hear about in this episode do affect you. We'd love to hear from you, and hopefully it shines a bit of positive light and hope in this direction. So here's the episode now.
And one more thing, soulmates, before we begin. This episode includes a candid conversation about mental health in farming, including a guest sharing his experiences with suicidal ideation. We believe these stories matter, and we're grateful for the honesty and bravery it takes to speak them out loud. That said, we want to offer a gentle content warning. If discussions of suicide or suicidal thoughts feel tender or could put your own well-being at risk right now, we encourage you to skip this episode or listen when you feel more supported. Your safety comes first. And most importantly, if you or someone you love is struggling, help is available. In the USA, you can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. In the UK, you can call 111 and select option 2 to access urgent mental health support. If you're elsewhere, please seek out local crisis services in your country. You're not alone. It is okay to ask for help. Now, on to the show. Well, welcome, soulmates, to a brand new episode. We're recording this in January, where it's definitely a month, certainly in the UK, where it gets dark at about 4 o'clock or 3:30, and we thought it was a good time to talk about the issue of mental health and have a good discussion about that. So we've got some really special guests to join us to help work through this really important issue. So, Mike, do you want to start by introducing yourself and who you are and how you're kind of connected to this world?
I am Mike Rosmann. I live at Harlan, Iowa in the United States. I no longer farm actively, but I still manage the farm. I am both a psychologist and a farmer. I have spent most of my life taking care of the behavioral health of farming people. I think they gravitated toward me when I left an academic position. I was a professor at the University of Virginia, but my wife and I decided we wanted to raise our children on a farm. So we moved to Iowa and farmed for about 45 years. I had a mixed grain and feed operation, corn, soybeans, oats, hay, and raised Simmental cattle as breeding stock. I have done quite a bit of work in the United States to try to understand why people farm and dealing with mental health issues.
Yeah, and it's really important. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And Hugh, coming on to you, do you want to introduce yourself and explain how you're connected to this world?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Hugh Addison. I farm with my family up in Cumbria, between the Lake District and the Yorkshire Dales, in a small village called Kingsmeaven. We've got a mixed organic dairy farm, well, dairy, sheep and beef. In my day job, I'm a mechanical engineer in medical technology and increasingly get involved with bits on the farm. My link to this is through a challenge that myself and my sister undertook last year to try and raise funds and awareness for mental health in UK farming. Through personal experience, we had begun to appreciate that there was a lack of understanding and awareness, not just within the farming community itself, but also further afield. And we wanted to try and do something about that. So we did a physical challenge that saw us swim, cycle and run across the UK last September, and we raised over £18,000 for the RABI, which is the Royal Agricultural Benevolence Institute, who are one of the main charities who are looking to try and support mental health as a cause within the UK farming sector.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for all of your work in that. That's really incredibly valuable. And Tom, do you want to explain who you are and how you're connected to this world?
So my name's Tom Morphew. Most people know me as Farmer Tom, and I run two companies called the Garden Army, which is a mental health charity that's based on our farm here. We've got 20 acres in total, and that's Full Circle Farms. And the money we earn from farming, we use to run the charity to support people with mental and physical disabilities.
Well, we're really glad you're here. And I should also note that superstar producer Claire Mackenzie is on the line. Hi, Claire.
Hi, I've joined you. So I'm not just outro. So thank you for all of you for being here.
Yeah. So, Mike, I was thinking maybe a good way to kind of start by framing the conversation is to talk about what the problem is. And I know you've got a great deal of experience there. So do you want to maybe give the listeners an insight, particularly from a US perspective, what the problem is and where we find ourselves today?
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be with all of you. I think farming has always been challenging. And it's been challenging because we want to produce essentials for life, foods and fibers, and increasingly now renewable fuels. What is happening now has always been happening in agriculture. Anytime there is a threat to losing the land and the possibility of carrying out our chosen way of life, we feel threatened. We feel like it's something that we have caused and we're to blame for it. We look for ways to overcome the threat, and especially all the people that are on this guest presentation, because we all have, in some ways, similar genetic backgrounds. We trace to Germanic blood back many centuries. The genetics of the first farmers in Germany, well, I shouldn't say the first, but the characteristics of farmers in Germany were to produce as much as possible, but they weren't very good as soldiers in the Roman Empire army. They tended to be willing to give up their land only as a last resort, and sometimes would give their lives rather than to surrender their land. We find that is still a central problem in all of the areas where people who have some of this Germanic blood in our system. So that includes Canada and Australia and all the English-speaking countries of the world. People who are not necessarily Germanic in their heritage also carry a part of this dramatic urge, this compelling urge to produce essentials for life. I call it the agrarian imperative. My work has involved first responding to the farm crisis of the 1980s in the United States and Canada. Currently, we are in an era of considerable economic insecurity in all types of farming in the United States, except for those who produce calves in cattle operations. The people who produce the cattle are different from those who are operating the feedlots. The problems have not changed. We take pride in doing the job well. We don't like government subsidies if they are available. We are struggling in our country with uncertainties in agricultural policy. We all participate in a global market, and the politics of global markets mean that sometimes producers in certain countries must struggle because they can't sell their products, and that is certainly going on. So there are lots of troubles in the United States right now, and I suspect in other parts of the world as well. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, no, you have. I mean, there are very few industries around the world that are so dependent on factors of which you have little to no control. And I think that must be incredibly difficult when that is your livelihood right there. You're dependent on politicians doing certain things. You're dependent on weather and all these things which you can't control.
Yes.
And I'm sure that must be a huge contributor to that. So yeah, it's tricky. And I guess, Hugh, I was going to ask you, like, as farmers, how are you able to develop awareness of your own mental health? And I know you've been through a journey, and I it'd be really interesting if you might be able to share that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think mental health is something that you often take for granted. I mean, I was trying to look up some statistics on this subject just before I came on, just so I was completely clued up. And I think there was a survey done by the RABI a few years ago that highlighted that I think 91% of farmers in that survey had stated that mental health was the biggest hidden concern for them. And that's against things like weather, politics, and all of these other externalities. I think it is recognized as a huge issue, but I think it's not something that we as farmers are particularly well programmed to cope with. Yeah, as you mentioned, Rich, I've been on my own personal journey with that. And then we as a family have had a bit of an outlook on that as well. I originally came back to the farm back in 2021 after COVID. I was endeared to get more involved. I was living down in Cambridge originally, and I was increasingly getting more and more interested in the farm. And there's obviously, with farms, there's this expectation about succession and taking on and taking over. So that was something that we'd begun to have a few discussions about. But through COVID, my dad had basically worked, I think it was about 500 or 600 days continuously. He didn't take any breaks through that, and he got himself into quite a difficult place himself. Not that he necessarily acknowledged that, but it was a tricky spot to be in. And that was mainly driven by the staffing issues that came with COVID. So that was just one of the things. You still have to milk cows, you still have to get on, and you still have to manage. So that dad just had to crack on with that. And that was really an encouragement for me to put things aside in Cambridge and to move back up home. So me and my wife had moved back up to Cumbria in September 2021. And I quickly went about making life as difficult as I possibly could do for myself. I was still continuing to work full time as an engineer. I was also working weekends and evenings on the farm to try and catch up and to try and take things in the direction that I saw fit for it. And I also thought it was a great idea to start a yogurt business at the same time. So
Wow.
really just went about and overloaded myself. And I think that's something that farmers are pretty good at. Like, there's always another job that can be done, and we're suckers to get involved with that. Fast forward about 8 months, and all wasn't particularly well. I was struggling a lot personally with some relationships with my family, and then the relationship with my wife started to break down. And yeah, over the course of that year, things completely flipped on their head. And by the following September, I had made the decision that I wanted to just get out and get away from things. And my marriage had broken down, and I'd had to put a lot of the changes that I had planned on pause, and I was just in a really bad situation. It took quite a lot of reframing to work its way out of it. I was suicidal, I think, at different points through that, and ultimately I sought comfort from having conversations with friends and family. I rang Samaritans once. I was driving up to Edinburgh to see a friend, and I had thoughts about driving the car into a tree, so I thought it was probably a good idea to pull over to the side of the road and stop. And yeah, it wasn't just farming, but a lot of those parts are connected to it. And just, I think as farmers, we put a lot of expectation on what we ourselves can deliver. And I mean, our family have farmed the same land since the 1500s. We've been in the same place for a very long time, and there is an expectation that's built into that about what you should be doing and like where you see yourself falling short. And I was definitely relating to that. So I think I was very fortunate in that because I was still working for a professional engineering company, I had access to therapy, and I took advantage of that, and that was a game changer for me. It was something that I hadn't done previously, and it was just a place that I could just talk about things and not feel like I was being judged, and be able to talk very honestly and openly about it. And that allowed me just to reframe my position and just to start rebuilding. And I'm happy to say now, 3 years later, in a completely different place. But it's taken a bit of work to get there. And I think one of the things that I realized going through that was that I was really fortunate that I had the tools at my disposal to get help. A lot of people I know don't have that. When I was doing the challenge earlier this year, I was speaking to a guy who used to work for us. He was one of our farm hands, and he'd just come up to me when he was doing some relief milking and was like, Hugh, I really appreciate you doing this. I have got in touch with the RABI since you've started talking about that, because one of his friends had taken his own life a year earlier, and my friend had started to have ideations around this as well, and was not in a great place. Yeah. And he had taken up that responsibility. But again, it was something that he wouldn't have had awareness of had that not been promoted. It's not something that we have really talked about a huge amount. And worse than that, there's also a stigma, I think, that goes around mental health and actually being sensitive about your own feelings and conversing about it. The bit that I mean about my family, so I think having these difficult conversations is really, really hard. And as a family, my mum's side are also from an agricultural background in Ireland. And my uncle, who would have been in his late 20s at the time, took his own life back in the mid-90s. And wow. As a family, we have not had a conversation about that. And I think as I approached the same age, I began to be curious about what's and why, not with any interest, but it was just a conversation that we hadn't had, because I think as families we're like, well, okay, just put that to one side and just focus on getting forwards. But a lot of these conversations, they obviously require sensitivity, and they require a very careful rooting out, because it's a hugely personal experience. But I think we do need to have conversations around mental health. When I moved down to Bristol a couple of years ago, I came out of a shop and there was a piece of graffiti on the wall opposite, and it was comfortable relationships require uncomfortable conversations. And that's something that we're terrible at in farming. And I really want to try and change that message.
Yeah. And especially talking as a Brit who now lives in the States. I mean, us Brits are famously terrible at talking about our feelings. and the stigma that comes with that. And that's been really interesting to see from both sides of the pond. But thank you, first of all, for sharing that. I mean, it's a lot of really personal stuff. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And Tom, coming on to you, I guess, how did you get involved with this? But equally, I mean, let's start to transition towards, that link between the soil and trying to find ways that we can improve that mental position.
Yeah, I mean, so my personal journey is many things annoyed me. So as I went through life, many things that I came across annoyed me, and one of those things was I've lost many friends to suicide, from the youngest being 21 up to kind of late 40s, early 50s. And that annoyed me as much as it probably did their families as well, because everyone just thought they were a bit depressed, and they would get over it. And we're English, we put a brave face on it, and it makes it even worse if you're a farmer struggling with mental health, because as farmers we just get on with it, and British farmers do just get on with it as well. As we've seen recently with farmers, we go and have very, very sedate marches, and we kind of stand in line and nod and do as we're told and hope that someone else sorts it out, and we go back to our farms and we deal with whatever we've got to deal with, and we know we're not going to make any money. We just get on with it, and but that's also very English of us as well. So that kind of annoyed me that we'd lost people who I thought were amazing people, and so we lost them too early, and they took all their knowledge and wisdom with them as well. And I then met a lot of older people, and one old lady who I met in hospital, and I fell off a roof and broke my leg. I was in hospital, and I'd overheard the doctor talking to her in another side ward and asked why she'd been a silly girl and tried to take her own life and things. And all I could hear was her voice and the doctor's voice. I didn't see her, so I didn't know how old she was. And she'd obviously heard a conversation I had with the doctor in my side room. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, when I was very high on morphine, I got woken up by a very old lady right in my face, which scared the living bejeepers out of me. And that was Betty. She was 80-something years old. And she said, do you mind if I have a chat to you? Because I used to be a farmer as well. And she sat down. She used to be a land girl. And got chatting to her, and eventually she told me why she was in there, and even though I kind of knew. So she was 80, I think 86, 87, and tried to take her own life because she was just lonely. She was so fed up with being lonely and had no one to talk to. But we sat up all night when she woke me up at 4 a.m. So we sat up all morning till the nurses came round, and she told me all about her time as a land girl. I mean, absolutely fascinating life this lady had. And that's all she wanted, was chance to talk. So I've seen it from both ends of the spectrum. I've met people who have obviously got problems but don't know how to talk, but then I've met people who are desperate to talk, but there's no one for them to talk to.
Yeah.
And then I meet people in their late 20s, early 30s who can arrive at this farm and tell me they've got anxiety and all sorts. I mean, we've got people here who have got terrible anxiety and are really struggling even to get to the door of the farm sometimes. And we have these kind of late 20-year-olds turn up and think, oh, I've got anxiety, and I think coming here would be really helpful. And I'm not a psychologist. I don't get involved in that. I just give them the tools. There's the farm, and go off and find your way. But what's interesting is about 2 or 3 weeks later, that same person will come up to me and go, I don't think I've actually got anxiety. And I know you haven't. You've got life, and no one told you how hard life is. But the reality, they're meeting people who are really struggling with other mental health problems, kind of put it into perspective for them, and then they kind of then wanted to chat about life a bit more and what that is, because no one tells you just how hard life is. So when you come out of university or college or finish school or whatever it's going to be, we don't gear the next generation up for how difficult life is, because at some point we're all going to have our heart broken. At some point we're all going to get ourselves into debt somehow. We're going to have relationships fall apart. You can have all these things, and then we're going to have our bosses going to be shouting at us and want us to work harder and do more, and we're not going to know how to deal with that, and we fall apart if we haven't ever been, because a lot of us have never been trained for that. It was slightly different for me because I'm dyslexic, so it's been a struggle all the way through school and things, and I started working when I was very young. So I had a good idea about how hard life was and what I'd need to do to get through it. So my job on the farm now is to help those people through life. And it used to be just ex-military people, but we decided quite early on that actually let's not just focus on one group of people. Let's open the door to everyone, because that is what society is like. If we put all the soldiers together and just help them, then they're never learning about the wider society, and then society isn't learning about the struggle that those soldiers have. So we tend to mix everyone together, so everyone ends up with a really good knowledge of a young person with autism, to an old lady who's been lonely, to the soldier with PTSD, and we mix them all together, and then they all get a bit of an understanding of each other. And it's a real leveler as well, and it really helps people kind of get their sense of belonging, that they belong in this group of people, or they belong in society.
And tell us a bit more about that. So you say come onto your place. Tell us more about like what the business is, and like how does somebody come onto your place? What does that mean?
So there's many ways in which they come here. So some people are just walk-ins. They just see us on Instagram or find about the website or through word of mouth, and they just turn up. That's sometimes quite difficult to deal with, because sometimes they're not ready to come to us yet. And we've had a few people who've had to have a walk. So the field behind me is nicknamed the Wobble Field. So people turn up and they're having a wobble, and we go for a long walk around this field. And there's many stops and many cuddles and many tears I've had. And then we get back to the bus here. So I'm sitting in Coldplay's tour bus at the moment. And this is our office. And this is a bit of a quiet space, so we sit and have a bit of a chat. And sometimes that chat is quite harsh. Like I say, I'm not a psychologist, and I say, look, I think you need to go and get some professional help. Once you find how to make your peace with what you're going through, then you can come back here, and this is where we grow you. And this is where you'll learn new skills and more resilience, and you'll meet other people. So we have to be quite tough with that and send them off. And we've got links to lots of amazing mental health charities and practitioners. And the other route to get to the farm is through social prescribing. So we have amazing links with most of the doctors and doctor surgeries around here. So if you go to the local doctors around here and you're struggling with stress, anxiety, depression, PTSD, anything, instead of being given happy pills, you're prescribed to come to this farm, which is amazing for the NHS, because it's a quick fix, if you like, because they send the problem my way. But this is actually a better way, I feel, of looking at dealing with that problem. I mean, antidepressants do have their place, and it's sometimes a great short-term fix, but it's not addressing the long-term problem, or why we've got ourselves into these problems. So coming to the farm and chatting with other people who have been struggling and things as well really helps them. That's their initial confidence boost. It's like, I'm not alone. There are other people who have got this wrong and have struggled and they've spiraled or whatever. But also those people are then able to tell their story, and the stories get passed around, and they realise that they're not actually alone, and no one on this farm judges. And we have 3 rules on this farm. So when people arrive, we talk about the rules. The first rule is you can do as much or as little as you want to do. So there's no pressure on you to come here and get really stuck in. But if you want to, crack on. Or you can sit in the sun all day and watch the chickens and chat about all sorts. The second rule is there's no talk of religion or politics, because that always ends in an argument anyway. So that's a no-no. And the third rule, so when people arrive, they're quite tense and they're concerned. We go through the rules, and the third rule is don't be a dick. And that seems to drop the barriers, and they realise actually we're quite relaxed here, and that covers a whole multitude of things. And that's where the kind of barriers are dropped a little bit, and they realise we're here to have a laugh and we're here to enjoy our time here. And then that's kind of basically what the farm is about. We grow fruit and veg, and we rear meat and things, but predominantly our main focus is on growing people. A byproduct of that, and what we use to fund the entire project, is our fruit and veg. But we also farm in a very different way. So we don't sell any of our veg. We only sell our plots of land. So we rent plots of land to the venues that we collect food waste from, and we grow all the fruit and veg, and we deliver it back to those venues for a fixed monthly cost, which means we know what we're getting paid every month. We know we can use to fund the Garden Army. So it's really important for us right at the beginning to make sure this was a self-funded charity.
Yeah.
We didn't rely on funding from governments because, well, let's not get talking about politics. It's a second rule, but they're not very good. And they tend to change a lot, and that can change funding, and then we can come unstuck quite quickly. So we wanted to be here for a long time to help people, because the worst thing I think you can do is start to engage with people, help them, and then take that away. If we had to close up and take that away, if you get that out the wrong, I mean, Hugh kind of touched on it slightly, it's such a delicate operation to make sure we are helping those people in the right way. What we don't want to do is promise the world and then have to close up and go, sorry, you're by yourself now, because sometimes that might be the only excuse they need to then drive into a tree or whatever it's going to be. It's a very delicate subject, but it's a subject we're very open with here, and we chat a lot about it. Everyone has their different ways of dealing with it. Ex-military people, it's all a lot of mickey taking and quite harsh kind of arguments with each other and things, compared to the old lady who doesn't want to admit that she's just been really lonely. Once they're here, it all kind of comes out and people are a lot more relaxed and they're able to talk. And that's basically what we've been doing for the last 4 years, is drinking tea, eating cake and talking and having a laugh. And there's no need to overcomplicate it the same way we farm. It really isn't a complicated thing. Everyone in this world at some point can come unstuck and can spiral into depression, or can just have that switch flick in their brain and they're spiraling off. And some of the most strongest people you never thought would ever struggle with depression or mental health problems, are here. And they've come unstuck at some point, and that can happen to anyone at any point. So it's a real kind of wake-up call to everyone. And we've only just really started touching on farmers and mental health, because I talk to lots of farmers, and it's something we want to help in a big way as we move forward. I was asked on another podcast a few years ago what I want to do, or where I see myself, or what do I want to achieve in the next 5 years. If I was asked that 5 years ago, it would have been to create a self-sustained care fund to help lots of people and produce food that people can afford. And that's what we've done. So we've done that. So the next project is we're going to change agriculture and change education, because they're two amazing industries that need help, but they need massive reform to continue. Otherwise, we're going to see teachers leaving the industry, and we're going to see farmers leaving the industry. Farmers are leaving the industry, but that's sometimes not their own fault. That's because they can't afford the inheritance tax and all sorts now. But that, again, that's politics. We won't go into that. But we're also seeing amazing teachers, and my wife is one of those amazing teachers who left the profession because she just didn't feel that she was able to teach anymore. She was just a part of a machine pushing these kids through, and she didn't want to do that. She wanted to make a real change. So what we're proving here, and the concept we've proven, is that getting people on the land, getting them outside in all weathers, having a laugh, getting their hands dirty and eating decent food really makes a massive change. And that's all linked to the soil. The answer has always been there, and it's the answer to many, many things. It's the soil we're standing on. So if we can build amazing life into our soil and fill that full of nutrients, that transfers to our food. And if we eat that food, we feel better, and then we're able to tackle some of what life throws at us. So if you put good in, you're going to get good out, and that's what we're all about, really.
Yeah, I love your approach. I love your approach. I was listening to a podcast the other day about this topic, and one of the guests on that said most people have two modes. One mode is talking, and the other mode is waiting to talk. And how important it is to be more, one mode is talk and one mode is listen and reflect. And I think that's the service that you're offering, amongst other things. I mean, Hugh, I also think about how can we encourage others to seek help early, before it gets to the point that you were, driving to see your friend in Edinburgh. What's been your experience of trying to encourage people down this road before it gets so severe?
God, it is really, really tricky. I was speaking to a friend who's a psychologist this morning, just to get her views on it, and I was just looking to see what are the options if you are really in a bad state. And if you are in a really bad state, I had not appreciated that you can go to A&E and you can get immediate psychiatric help there. She had suggested that's a thing. So that's obviously at one extreme. On there are some really good charities that are starting to pop up within farming specifically, but also Samaritans are great outside of that. But the RABI offer a phone line which is free and anonymous, and you're able to just talk to someone who is not part of your family, not part of your team, not part of your friends, who you can just speak to. And that goes for whether you're feeling lonely or you're just having a really hard time on that particular day. I think the Farming Community Network, the FCN, offer a similar thing. And then there's a couple of local charities that have started to pop up over the last couple of years. So there's a one in Herefordshire called We Are Farming Minds, and I understand they're doing a really, really good job on that front. And they're supported by the Duchy of Cornwall and Lancaster as well. There is also a really great resource. It's a New Zealand website called Farmstrong. If you just go onto that, it's just a load of videos of Kiwi rugby players and farmers just chatting. The Kiwi accent makes it all far better and just puts in a good mood already. But it's just tips for like, oh, you're having a bad day. Well, have you thought about trying to reframe that problem that you seem to be having? Just try and take a step back. What does this mean in the big picture? Okay, it's not that big a thing. Look at it.
Yeah.
So, but there, like you say, podcasts are a really good resource. There are some really great things out there, and I think that one of the challenges I think with farming as a whole right now is the threat of loneliness. It's also an aging industry. I think that has its own weight on it. I mean, my dad is 62, so he's just a little bit older than the average farmer in the UK. I think that's 60. I think that weighs on that generation quite hard because there's a succession thing about like you want to make sure that you're building something for the next generation. When that next generation's not interested or not there, that's really difficult. Like building in places to speak for the farming community that I grew up in Cumbria, that was always auction marts and the farm gate. And just like, I mean, when I was growing up, we had 5 people who were working on the farm at any one time. That's now 3 most of the time, but we are still pretty lucky in that respect that there are multiple. I know there are arable farmers out there who are by themselves for weeks at a time, but actually like having the opportunity to get out and speak to people and just vent sometimes. I understand that the auction mart at Kirby Stephen has just redone their cafe, so they're encouraging all the people to come and have a chat. So there are obviously the virtual things like phone lines and websites that you can go to, but for people who maybe can't access that, there is the physical world still there. You can get out and see. And I think I'd encourage people to have those conversations sooner rather than later. And yeah, like you were saying, Tom, like the lady in the hospital, I think a lot of people are just really looking just to have a conversation and get a weight off their shoulders.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they realise that they're struggling, they see it as failure. They see it as I've got this wrong. I'm failing. That's what I hear a lot of the time when people are ashamed to talk about it. They're ashamed to talk because they feel like they failed. And one of the things we encourage at the farm, we call it F-ups, is actually failing, is getting things wrong, because it's impossible for us to get these things right all the time. And probably for you, Hugh, when you're taking on a family farm, there's this. I mean, luckily I'm not taking on a farm, not from a farming family, but I can imagine the kind of weightless put on your shoulders to try and do your parents proud, because you know how hard your dad's worked and your mum's worked to keep that farm together, and their previous when it's a massive generational thing, I mean the pressure must be huge for you to try and make a success, because it's being handed to you, like it's now your turn.
Yeah, you don't need a generation.
Make it success for your kids or whatever. It's absolutely huge.
Yeah.
Then there's also that problem where you also don't want to insult your dad and his granddad by changing the ways too much, which is what I hear all the time. Is like, well, Dad's always done it this way, and I'm going to get an absolute bollocking if I tell him a different way. So there's this constant battle. Like you know, there's possibly a better way of doing it, but God, if you get it wrong, they're ready to. They're going to be on you, and it's hard.
UK Business Microbes, yes with a Z, is heroically improving our health from the ground up, literally. From soil, stomach.
Take a daily shot of Microbes' award-winning beneficial bacteria sourced from soil and lovingly fermented with herbs and minerals to revive your gut health. A remarkable 92% of customers say it makes a difference.
But why stop there? Healthy humans grow from healthy soils.
Just as you can take a probiotic to rewild your gut, you can also apply Microbes to your soil before or after planting to enrich your land, because your crops deserve good bacteria too.
Join forces with nature. Join forces with Microbes. Get 20% off with the code LOVESOIL at their website, microbes.co.uk. microbz.co.uk.
It's funny that the Rachel, the friend I was speaking to earlier about this, she was saying that she sees a lot of, she's based in Kirkby Stephen, she sees a lot of farmers and their families around, and a lot of people come to them with really acute issues like finances aren't great right now, the weather's getting me down, politics is pissing me off at the moment, whatever that is. But quite often they're the acute things that are inflaming deeper parts, which can be linked to like succession is a big thing, like trying to like work out what you're meant to be doing with your family and things like that. It's often those dynamics which are the real stressor points, and then that's inflamed by politics, weather, finances, all of the loneliness, but a lot of those things are really deeply entwined, and farming is uniquely positioned where those relationships are still there. There's a lot of like family businesses don't operate in the same way that farms still do. It's
Totally.
archaic in many ways.
In one of the previous pods, we had Will Harris on, and he down in Bluffton, Georgia, and he shared with us that, he had to change the way that his father was farming. That was the big thing. But B, his children had no interest on coming back into the family farm. But when he started to farm differently, regeneratively, and the wildlife started to return and the biodiversity, that was the point where his kids changed their mind and they wanted to come back into the family business. And that was a huge, mental win and weight off his shoulders. But Mike, I wanted to come back to you. In our little chat we had before this recording, you shared with me a little bit about a study in Sweden. I thought it might be a good time to talk a little bit more about the science and the connection between, farming and mental health. Would you mind sharing a bit more about that?
Thank you. I thank Tom and Hugh for being so frank and open. You have validated what some 45 years of research that I have been involved in has determined or found as well. The study that Richard is talking about was undertaken in 2012. It was published in 2012 by Christina Kolstrup, Kolstrup, and Jan, Jan, Hultgren, Hultgren. They looked at 41 operators of dairies and cattle feedlots in Sweden. They also looked at 21 employees. They found that as the employees and operators rated themselves as anxious and troubled, the more likely they were to require veterinary visits to their operations, and the somatic cell count in the milk of troubled operators and employees was higher. As these operators and employees who were struggling with mental health issues improved, the number of veterinary visits went down, as well as milk improved in terms of a lower rate of mastitis organisms, or that somatic cell count. A couple other points I'd like to make, because you set this up so well, you two men. We have looked to figure out what works. You have demonstrated it. What we found is that troubled people now reach out for help much better than they did 3 and 4 generations ago, or even 2 generations ago. But the same problems persist. In our country, polls have shown that economic uncertainties are the highest predictor of anxiety, followed by depression. Usually, the troubled farmer shows his or her difficulties through quarreling and quibbling with others in the family or operation. And that is a signal that they are looking to figure out solutions. It doesn't usually work because unless there is assistance from people who understand what works and what doesn't, the more likely they are to remain stifled. So they have to reach out for people who do have some understanding of mental health. Or I would like to use the word behavioral health, because I think behavior is a term that is less negatively stigmatized than mental. We can't say, for example, oh, he's behavioral, whereas we could insult someone by saying, oh, he's mental.
Yeah.
The points that you illustrated are that first, anxiety occurs. It worsens as the conditions that are troubling persist. Those are in the form of economic challenges, or maybe weather events that pile on, or maybe the losses of valued employees or loved ones who are important in the farming operation. The stressors often are varied, but we can handle one or two at a time. But when they combine and we have three or more, we become vulnerable to anxiety, which after time depletes us of serotonin and beneficial bodily hormones. That's when depression sets in. This is what I call those Germanic tendencies to respond to stress. Although non-Germanic farmers experience and have some of the same problems, but the Vikings, for better or for worse, spread their genes around the world. At any rate, though, if the issues aren't addressed in counseling with someone who understands agriculture and has credibility to the farmer, if they're not addressed, they typically get worse to the point that they may become emotionally paralyzed. So the flight or fight response has another characteristic. It's fight the threats or flee from them or freeze. And many people do freeze emotionally with emotional paralysis. And that is partly why people who are troubled can't make as good decisions about the farming operation. They're consumed with the troubles that are overwhelming them and can't make sound decisions.
And Mike,
both of you then demonstrated. I'm sorry.
I was going to say at that point in somebody's journey, Hugh's talked a bit about where you go for help in the UK.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could share good resources for our listeners who are in the US of who would be a good place for them to call and to seek help. Where would you recommend?
In the US, persons can approach a farm crisis hotline in many of the agricultural states. They have a farm crisis telephone hotline, email line, or they can call Farm Aid. They can even call 988, the suicide hotline in the US. These kinds of services are set up also in Australia and in many other agricultural countries around the world now. Canada has a very good performing system that was started in Manitoba. Now, in the US, we did succeed about 8 years ago to get federal funds called the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network. It put $10 million, that's million, not billion, I wish it were, into programs that would train counselors to understand farming, to set up hotlines and helplines, to provide free counseling so that finances would not be a barrier to seeking help, and to make sure that persons were educated more and more about the causes of stress, the signs and signals of stress, and where to go for help. So agricultural states have farm crisis hotlines. Many states do not necessarily have a federally funded program. The funds are distributed, by the way, through universities at University of Vermont, Louisiana State, Iowa State, Washington State University. The American Farm Bureau Federation has taken upon itself to develop the Farm State of Mind program. If people look online, they can find American Farm Bureau Federation State of Mind, MIND. That shows them where they can obtain peer counseling at any time. If the trouble being discussed requires more than the assistance of a peer, they can make referral immediately to a professional mental health provider or behavioral health care provider. Or in some cases, they can provide references or recommendations on who to see in ag lending or in the U.S. extension programs or any type of assistance. But the counseling is what they focus on.
Yeah.
The findings that we have accrued show that the suicide rate went down for several years after the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network was set up, and as these funds became available around the country. Now we're facing a time when stress is rising, and we look for the possibility of increases in farmer suicide. I get telephone calls from people frequently. And just last week received a call from a wife whose husband took his life. And now she wants to follow up to obtain assistance for how can I deal with this and turn my loss into something that helps educate others. Just like Hugh and Tom, you guys have done this.
Yeah.
So the Farm Bureau, that the American Farm Bureau State of Mind program and crisis hotlines that are available online in your state will be resources.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Mike. That's really valuable. And just to be clear to our listeners, we'll put all of these references that Michael and Hugh and Tom have shared with us in our notes.
I happen to have a book here that I'm not trying to promote my book, but it does summarize much of what I was saying. It also has stories to illustrate points about dealing with farm stress. It came out in November 2024, not 25, published by Purdue University Press. What's
the book called, Mike?
Meditations on Farming, the Agrarian Drive, Stress, and Mental Health. And we use that word mental because it is more commonly used, but as a whole, the United States is moving toward use of the term behavioral when possible.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mike, for sharing that with us and our listeners. The book is really worthwhile looking at. So thanks for sharing that. We're moving towards the end of our time here. So I guess, Hugh, what last thoughts do you have that you would like to share with our listeners?
Thank you very much. So I'll keep it short because I appreciate I interrupted Tom before.
No.
So I think one of the bits that you'd asked before I came on this is about how mental health links to soil. I think there's a couple of real opportunities there. One of them is, I think, optimism. I think when we talk about regenerative agriculture, often it is with a positive note that we feel that things can improve. And one of the bits that I really notice is when you go to the regenerative events like Groundswell and things like that. I brought my dad along last year when we went down, and he came away from it just really engaged by the entire thing. You've got loads of young people who are really getting into the nitty-gritty of farming and have great case studies to show for what they're doing on farms. And that's so positive to see compared to going to some of the agricultural shows where it is talking about the overdraft or the debt that's going with it, or like the moaning about the politics of the day, which are all pressing. I'm not undermining that at all, but I think there is a real energy with regenerative agriculture that does spur people on. And as Tom mentioned before, the food, like I think like trying to focus on producing good nutrient-rich food is good for all people, and I think it's better for you producing it. I'm really proud that we're producing organic milk. I honestly believe that it is better for the consumer. I know it's better for the cow. I know it's better for our land, and that is a real motivator for me. So I'd say those are two links as well.
I went to Groundswell last year for the first time, but before that I went to Cereals, another event I hadn't been to before, but I was invited to go. And I found Cereals incredibly depressing, because it seemed that Cereals that that kind of drive in farming was go big or go home. It was massive chemical use, huge investment in massive machines. And if you don't get that right, then you might as well give up farming. I was like, well, I know there's something different. The reason I'd never been to Groundswell before is because a lot of farmers I've met who have been trying to farm more regeneratively or organically or biodynamically have always been hippies, basically. And I'm all for hippies. I love them. They're great. But if we're going to change an industry, we can't do it on peace, love, and happiness. It's got to be done on. It's got to produce money. It's got to be financially viable. Otherwise, the big farms that might give us those opportunities to change the agriculture and go, we've seen it all before, and all you want to do is skip around in the long grass and smoke strange smelling cigarettes. So I'd always distanced myself slightly. So when I eventually went to Groundswell, it was really quite amazing because I met a lot of farmers who came up to me, who follow me on Instagram and things, and wanted to have these conversations. And it was really interesting to see farmers that had moved from cereals to Groundswell because they've been trying that way for a long time and it really wasn't working. It was only seemed to be getting worse. They're degrading their soils more. They're encouraged to invest more in machinery and more into fertilizers, and they wanted to see if there was a different way. So they were going there with a real open mind, looking for a different way. And what my mission is to try and do is to prove there is a different way, but also there is a way that you can earn more money doing it that way. And that's the only way we're really going to get any of this to change, is to shift that across and go, right, prove the concept that it makes money, and we can help lots of people along the way as well. I think it's really hard, especially for farmers and to a certain extent the general public, to admit they're struggling with their mental health and then go and seek help. They would rather go and talk to Bob the neighbour or Jim down the road or whoever who is a farmer, who understands the struggles, who in some way could maybe talk to them. And I think the way for us to really look at approaching and fixing mental health within the agriculture industry is to train ourselves internally, is to seek a bit of training to find out how we can talk to other people, what words we can use of encouragement and support and things, and the industry can fix itself. We've always done it before. Farmers have always helped each other out before, and I think that's really important. Having another farmer who understands your struggles but also has a bit of knowledge on how to help you through those difficult times is really, really key. And that's happening more and more. I'm seeing more groups of farmers joining together. We've just been to Lanmer, and for us, it's just an excuse to drink lots of Guinness, but it's also a really good chance to talk to for other farmers to let their hair down a bit, and some beautiful mullets were there. To really start getting a chat and remembering what farming is about. It's about being outside. It's about getting muddy and cold and having a bit of a laugh and doing stupid things, making mistakes, getting your mate to take the piss out of you because you've made those mistakes, but just being open about the mistakes, because mistakes are what we all learn from, and actually encouraging people to make those mistakes, try and make a change, because where it might be that I've tried something that's gone horribly wrong and it's cost me a fortune, I'm going to have a chat with the bloke down the road and we're going to have a laugh about it, but he's going to remember that mistake I made and I might equally remember the mistake he's made. And then all of a sudden we drop this kind of guard that we've all got to get it right all the time, because we're never going to get it right all the time. So it's really admitting that it's okay to get it wrong. It's okay to make those mistakes, and let's have a little bit of a laugh about it and drop the guard a little bit, because that's how we all learn.
Yeah, no, I agree. Producer Claire, do you have any closing thoughts to add before we end?
Well, I just really want to thank you all, but I also wanted to just ask from each of you, so I think the biggest thing is I work in a cancer centre once a week, and I've done it for many years. I do hands-on therapy, but I do a lot of listening. And I think it's a real issue, and Richard alluded to earlier. So if you've got a friend who wants to help you, how do you advise that? Because it's the most uncomfortable thing in the world, where there's someone's got behavioral health issues, or someone's got a long-term illness. Most people find it really, really uncomfortable to say. Could you give any advice on how to be with someone that needs that? Just really, or just that first step of, as a family or friend, trying to support someone?
Well, it's happened several times on the farm, and it's actually happening right now. So one of the young lads who comes to the farm, his mum is in a very bad way, and he's gone to say goodbye to her today. And he's been coming to the farm for 3 or 4 months, and part of that was with his mum as well. So a lot of the other volunteers are kind of aware, but I can already see them starting to panic because they don't really know what to say. So with his permission, which I will talk to him later today, I will have a chat with the rest of the group here and just say, look, carry on as we are. We just talk. And no one really knows how to approach those subjects, because they are very, very difficult when someone's lost someone. What do you say? Sorry for your loss. We've had, when you're talking to someone who's autistic, they go, well, it wasn't your fault. You don't need to be sorry. They're very matter of the fact. I think, coming together as a community that we've created here it really helps a lot of people. We've had people who have lost their very close loved ones, and they've come back to the farm and asked if it's okay if they come back even without their partners. Of course it is. This is your farm. This is where you can come. And it's quiet for a bit, and people kind of get on with their jobs, but gradually the conversation starts, and feel, actually, this is they're happy to talk about it. We're happy to try and talk about it, but it's a very awkward thing for most people who aren't professionals in that field to come to terms with and talk about. But the reality is, it's the only thing we're all guaranteed. We're all going to pass away at some point. So, and in an agricultural setting, most farmers are pretty black and white when it comes to death, and we deal with it every day. We lose animals and things. We have to put some animals down, put animals out of their misery, all this kind of thing. And so farmers are in a sort of unique position in respect that we deal with death all the time. Dealing with death of a loved one is slightly different, but farmers have a unique way of just kind of talking about it and just accepting it, trying to find a way to make your peace with it. And but it does rock the boat slightly here, and people are already slightly nervous about it. People who've got anxiety are getting anxious about it. So my job as the farm lead is just to talk to everyone, going, it's okay. These things happen, and there are other people who have got health conditions who aren't going to get better, and we talk about that quite openly. That is what's going to happen at the end, and we have to make our peace of it now, and let's enjoy this time. But a lot of it is talking about the good stuff, the good things that have happened when they were here, the things they said, the things they've done. So I think everyone deals with death in a different way, and I think it's a very hard thing to struggle with, especially when they've made some pretty strong bonds with those people as well. So yeah, it's always difficult.
What do you think, Hugh? What are the right things to say, and what are the wrong things to say when trying to be there for your friends?
So I think the right things to say is probably initially just not to say anything. Listen, like that's the really important thing. And I would also advocate just maybe taking the pressure off it. Like, go for a walk. Try to get something else going that allows that not to be the only focus is about what the issue is. So I think just give that individual the space to be able to talk and properly listen to them, switch the phone off and really give them your attention, because that is this is really precious. And if somebody's being that open and honest with you, you owe them your attention. So just trying to do that. Beyond that, checking in regularly and just making sure that you are there to support them in whatever they are going through. And also, like Tom mentions, just there are opportunities in there for humor when it's appropriate as well. So just try to make sure that it's like that there is a lightheartedness that goes with it as well. This is like as much as anything. And when you're in a depressed state, like you know it's depressing enough, but you're looking for the chinks of light, and that's really what can help you to build and get out of that place.
Yeah, number 3, don't be a dick. And Mike, in your experience, what have you learned about the right thing to say and the wrong thing to say in these situations?
Well, the right thing to say is either I'm here because I'm concerned about you. Expressing your willingness to help is often much needed by a person who's undergoing stress. They may open up, they may not. If there is a danger in your mind that he or she cannot be left alone, you can't leave them alone. You have to arrange for assistance from family, or if necessary, through the government. In our country, it would be the sheriff. At any rate, it is important that we be available. Tom and Hugh, you said it better than I can say it. Being available and supporting people and telling them that reaching out for professional help when needed is a sign of strength rather than a weakness.
I found, especially on the farm, and farmers and care farm people are very lucky in this situation, that sitting with someone and talking to them is very difficult, because it's a kind of face on, and okay, I've got to try and give you this information and you're going to try and make it better. But actually, if you've got the space, go for a walk around that field, the Wobble Field, because I think there was a study done, when you're walking, it allows the left and right side of the brain to start functioning because of the walking motion, and that allows you to not hold back so much and talk. And if you're walking and talking, it's a much easier way to get them to open up, to tell you, rather than just sitting in front of it. But the same goes for just getting on with jobs in the farm. And that's where a lot of the therapy here happens, when we're working together. So when we're using the left and right side of our brain and we're doing tasks and lifting, and all of a sudden we're having these conversations and more's coming out than we expected to come out. But it's really having the open space so you don't feel trapped at all. I think that sometimes when therapy can go wrong, when you sit in a room, 4 walls, and that person's sitting in front of you, it's really quite intimidating. But if you're walking around a farm and you're going past a pig or whatever, and it puts you in a more relaxed state where you may be more open to talking. So I think my suggestion would just walk and talk is probably the best option. And then, especially on a farm, because you've got a few distractions. If it does get a bit stale or there's that awkward silence, there's always a pig or a sheep or a cow or something to take your mind off it. Yeah. That would be my suggestion. Yeah, go for a walk.
I think being there with that person will open up a search for who can I count on to help. Do we need to bring in the pastor? Can I go with you to the doctor? Can I help you make that phone call to this hotline that I know about? Those are the kinds of supportive comments that bring out a sense of caring and wanting to help.
Yeah.
And Hugh, I just wanted to ask you, I saw on the post yesterday for RABI, they were talking about their farmer's first aid kit. Does that have mental health stuff as well in it?
Yeah, I believe it does. I haven't read it myself yet, but I believe it does. So it's definitely worth linking in there. They have the as well that's worth adding to.
Great. And I have found Lens Light and Yellow Wellies with the others that were listed.
Yeah, that's it. FCM, Farming Community Network, is pretty good. We Are Farming Minds. They're mostly in the southwest, but again, they have a phone line that is free for anyone, and they'll direct people in the appropriate way. Farm Strong in Scotland is also.
Have you guys had experience of journaling and writing stuff down as being a useful thing that helps?
Yeah, I started journaling when I went through that really crap time. So this is the 2026 one. That's the 4th journal now that I've started writing that every day, and sometimes rubbish, but I found it really useful. That actually is probably the single most useful thing that I've found.
There is help out there, but we just have to know where to ask and persistent in asking. I know you have a great center for rural and farm health in Great Britain. In Canada, they have the Farm and Ranch Stress Line out of Brandon, Manitoba, but they also have the Canadian Farm and Rural Stress Hotline. In Great Britain, it's Life Stress is the name of the outlet, I think. They're all available when we do a search online.
Cool.
Yeah, and we didn't allude to the fact that I heard yesterday, and I've heard this before, that, particularly, and I know I've been personally affected by it as well, that sadly for men it's higher, isn't it? For acute and really serious, and sadly suicidal seems to be a higher.
Yeah, we saw that on the farm actually. When we first started, I had about 27 wives. Because it's predominantly women who brought themselves to the farm. So I had lots of people nagging at me all the time. But it was interesting to see the older blokes didn't kind of come along, and then one old bloke did. So then when the next bloke come along, it's like, oh, there is another bloke here, and there is another bloke. And then now we've got, it's probably 50-50. But women are a lot more aware, and you help yourself out a lot more than blokes do, especially the older generation. We still stiff upper lip and get on with it and knuckle down and work harder, and we're too ashamed to and also, like I said earlier, we're too ashamed to admit that we did get it wrong, and then that's another thing we go off spiralling for. So yeah, it's women are better, basically.
We found that women initially back in the 90s and 80s, 90s, even up into the early 2000s, were more likely to contact resources or to reach out to a hotline or helpline or any type of assistance. Now it's more men that reach out. One thing that is coming and is that our managing behavioral health is becoming integrated into the curricula of college programs in agricultural business, animal husbandry, animal science, veterinary medicine. It should be integrated even into the school programs at the local community level. So there's nothing wrong. I'd encourage you to go to your agricultural educators in your school systems and to give them the resources that they can promote, such as showing this film.
And I think also we just have to remember that it's really important just to be a human, right? Like whether you're the father, the son, the daughter, whoever, whatever you're like, none of that really, like, just be a human. And that's probably, a useful thing to remember. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, to Mike, to Tom, and especially Hugh, to the things you shared today. I really appreciate that vulnerability and openness from all of you. If any of this connects with you listening to this, we'll put all of the notes, we'll summarize everything, we'll include easy links and things that you can go to. But yeah, until next time, thank you all so much for joining us, and it's bye for now.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, so lovely to have you.
So Claire, that was the episode. Thoughts, feelings, emotions. What do you think?
I felt it was quite special, really, that everyone was so open. Obviously, Hugh opened up hugely. One of his quotes, excuse my look down at my book, one of his quotes he said I thought was amazing: comfortable relationships with my own uncomfortable conversation, was a kind of quote he saw on a wall, which was really,
the quote was comfortable relationships require uncomfortable conversations. I think that was which is just so true. And I love that he was kind of vulnerable enough just to tell his story, which is obviously must be pretty uncomfortable to talk about.
I think his challenge, the borderline challenge, if anyone needs to look it up, and that money went to RABI, and they are very supportive charity, and I think he's learned a lot through his family, but also I think doing this challenge has enabled him to do a lot of talking, and so therefore he did it in a really beautiful way. And I think it was well offset with Mike, because he's got years of working with farmers, and rather alarmingly said, because some of the funding that was initially set up in the US seems to be there so much that he gets phone calls the entire time. And he's obviously got his books and everything, and he just, I love the way he says he doesn't know to talk about mental health and mental behavior is his take on it, isn't it?
Yeah,
so,
behavioral health rather than mental health. I really like that too. I thought that was really, like, not having any negative stigma attached to it. I think that's really important. And it was great as well seeing Mike's reaction to listening to Tom and Hugh talk about it, and kind of validating all of his years of research in this area. And now there are Hugh, who's kind of been through it and going on a better pathway, and Tom, who's really got a great setup to help people by having this connection between soil and farming, and getting back on track. And I love that whole realization for Mike, that all of his work is now kind of being put into action by the other two young gentlemen on the call. So that was cool.
Yeah, I mean, when Tom brought some of the lightness things, like, talking about the Wobble Field and Wobble Field. And when he walked around, and I love the way he's very respectful, which you have to be in this space. Doesn't overset the mark. Will clearly say to them, if you're not ready to be here, you need to go back and talk to a doctor, seek psychological help. But they are, by being outside or having those walks, or even just having a cup of tea and a piece of cake, people are opening up to them. And I think, and they know they're very lucky. And Tom is good at just letting people be themselves, which is very special.
Yeah. And I think it's also interesting, I can't remember who was it that said it, but it's okay to make mistake. It's okay to make mistakes. That's how we learn. And I love that. And it must be hugely pressured to be a son or daughter of a farmer who's farmed a certain way. And just that pressure to not be the generation that, loses it or makes a mistake that puts the farm in jeopardy, whether it's inside of your control or not. And yeah, that's obviously what makes farming so totally unique, and can be such a dangerous place mentally to be. So I thought that was great. I also really enjoyed learning about how much help and support is out there. And I mean, for example, I think Hugh mentioned about Farm Strong, a New Zealand example. I know we have some listeners down in New Zealand, and I had a little look into that really interesting organization, website, videos, podcasts, and things that can be there to help you. So hopefully, globally, we're in a much better position in terms of having help to give to the farmers, but it's about seeing if the farmers, being brave enough for them to look for it and seek it out. So it feels like we're going in a slightly better direction, but it's...
Well, Mike did say that women used to be the ones to first reach out, and now he's finding men, and that was really nice to hear, because I know you and I personally have both been touched by men being very unwell mentally. And so I think that is good, that even in these most stoic communities, that there is a bit of reaching out for help. But we, on our website, once you've listened to this, on the show notes, and perhaps as well on posts, etc., we will put in a long list of everything that's been mentioned and a few other organisations. So, go to those places to seek further information, any support needed. So, yeah, and I think I really loved at the end, because I think why are we doing this here for, we're talking about soil mostly, and what's that connection? And Tom, obviously, it's quite obvious the work he's doing there, people getting their hands in the soil, and he's seeing some really good, wonderful healing. And Hugh recognised that, once soil it's improving, can improve your food, improve your mood, improve your health, and all of that. So it's a whole kind of complete picture.
Yeah, no, it was great. Well, I really hope as a listener you found that useful. I know personally, just chatting with them, I found it really useful, just learning about the connections, learning about the evidence, learning about the help that's out there, and also knowing that there are people out there like Tom and Hugh and Mike, who's given his whole life to it, that are really working hard to make it a better place, the world, the world of farming. And so I found that really encouraging, and I hope you did too as a listener. Yeah, any last thoughts?
Well, I think we might come back to this, mightn't we, and talk bring other examples or other people, different perspectives as we go on. My only other thing we didn't allude to, and Mike brought it up a lot. I'd never heard of this whole German lineage, the historical connection to where we drive ourselves. He brought it up a lot.
Yeah, the agrarian imperative, I think it's called. Yeah, that was really interesting.
So it's made me want to explore, and obviously his book is there, and we will put down his details of that and a link as well. So anyway, I want to thank our guests again for being, for tackling it and talking about such a sensitive subject. So we hope it's a good listen for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you very much for listening, soulmates, and we will see you very soon. Bye for now.
In 6 inches of soil, our world comes alive. A podcast of passion where all souls thrive. Soilmates unite in a bold common chase, building our future through Earth's living grace.